My name is Shannon Baxter. I'm the collections manager at the Dartmouth Heritage Museum, which is here in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. Today, I brought in a canvas backpack that was donated by a Walter Roland Simons. Sadly, we don't know too much about the backpack in terms of the military connections, so hopefully we might learn a bit more about that today.
The 64th Battalion was a short-lived battalion formed during the First World War that drew recruits from Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island to provide reinforcements closer to the front line. The battalion was headquartered in Sussex, New Brunswick, where the infantry trained for almost a year before departing to England. Led by Lieutenant Colonel H. Montgomery Campbell, its maritime members served as reinforcements for the Canadian Expeditionary Forces already in France. For their efforts, the men were awarded the Battle of Honour and were later commemorated through a memorial bronze plaque carrying the names of the unit's 245 men who died during their service. The plaque was given to Sussex's Trinity Anglican Church by the 64th Battalion Association in 1931.
Welcome to Militaria, Shannon, and I was wondering if you could tell us what you brought in today.
So today I brought in a canvas backpack. It was donated to the Dartmouth Heritage Museum by Walter Roland Simons. And in the flap here, I'll just show it. It has the 64th Battalion. In terms of its potential military connections, we don't know too much about that.
Well, and as you said, this is a First World War backpack used by the Canadian Army in the First World War. The other thing, as you pointed out, is the annotation inside with the 64th Battalion. We know that that's a First World War unit. It's not from before the First World War because they were known as regiments then, and they're battalions in the First World War because we raised 260 infantry battalions in the First World War, 64th being one of the local ones. It was raised in Halifax. So this fits in to being from here and a First World War artifact. So Shannon, were you able to find out anything about Mr. Simons and his service during the First World War or the 64th Battalion in particular?
I couldn't find anything about his particular involvement. We do have photo albums from the family that show basically Halifax during the First World War, but not so much about the 64th Battalion, no.
So when I researched Simons, I couldn't find that he served in the Canadian Expeditionary Force and could not find that he was in the 64th Battalion. Obviously, this was his backpack. How he obtained it is, I guess, up to speculation, but I can find no evidence that he served in the Expeditionary Force. The provenance on it, on the other side of it, is the markings inside, and that it's marked to the 64th Battalion. To me, I find that unusual because normally kit is marked to the individual and not the battalion. And it made me wonder whether, because they were a reinforcement, they were raised in 1915, maybe kit was not as accessible as it was later on in the war. That's where I'm sort of thinking where that's going, and to me, that's unusual. The 64th was raised in Halifax. They started recruiting in May in 1915, so it was one of the reinforcement units. And then in 1916, the battalion was broken up as reinforcements and absorbed by the 40th Battalion. Those soldiers would then have been sent to the units that made up the Canadian Corps that was actually in France and Belgium fighting. They never made it over to France to fight as a formed unit. They were strictly reinforcements.
I did learn quite a bit about my artifact today. It was really interesting to sort of learn more about the military background connected with it. So be able to sort of expand my knowledge in that way was really great.
So Shannon, you had said that Mr. Simons was an important part of Dartmouth's history and the history of your museum. I was wondering if you could expand on that.
Sure. So Walter Roland Simons, he was one of the founding members of the Dartmouth Heritage Museum Society. He was born in 1898 here in Dartmouth. His parents were both immigrants from England. They moved here, raised their family. He lived primarily in the downtown Dartmouth area. So he basically spent his entire life here in Dartmouth and also taking photos of Halifax and Dartmouth as it grew. And later on in life, even though he was by trade an accountant and a bookkeeper, he grew a love of painting. So we definitely have a variety of artifacts within the collection from this family. So it's really cool to see sort of how he was involved within the community and then how he then sort of expressed that through art.
Like our museum, a lot of our founding members, I don't want to say emptied out their basements, but we received a lot of artifacts from them, and it sounds like this was the case there. And to me, that's important because these are people that have been around in the community for a long time. These artifacts are there to be exhibited and to tell stories of what's happened and how Dartmouth became what it is. So when was the society formed?
It was formed around 1962, and then the actual museum was established in 1967. They were collecting artifacts and then showing them in schools. And then 1967 is when the first Dartmouth Heritage Museum was built. It was on Wise Road. It stood there until about early 2000s, where unfortunately the building was condemned. It was a very sad day. They had to tear down the building, and a lot of our artifacts are now currently in storage.
So are there plans for a new museum?
That's the question we get so often, and unfortunately there's no clear answer on that. We're just trying to showcase artifacts where we can within the space we have, so the two houses and also online through things like Nova Muse. I wish I had a better answer than that. So what I think is important about holding on to artifacts like the bag I brought in today is that they help build a better picture of the story of the people who own them. Artifacts are just one of those pieces, that tangible item that people can look at and get a better sense of those stories.
So Shannon, thank you so much for bringing in this artifact and talking to us about Mr. Simons. Are there any plans in the immediate future for this artifact in the museum, or is it going back into storage?
For now, it'll probably go back into storage, but we actually did a exhibit a few years ago on Walter Simons' art, so it might be cool to sort of showcase more about his life and his story, and the backpack might be a feature there. I do appreciate learning more about where it might have come from. We have a large collection, so it's difficult to have everything on display at once. So for now, it'll probably be back in storage, but hopefully in the future, if we want to have an exhibit that focuses on the First World War and the Dartmouth connection, hopefully we'll be able to feature that.